and respect other species and so forth. And so when you see those moments where that environment is transformed against your will in a negative way, forever, that's the sense of soul nostalgia. It's not just change, it's change that separates you from your surroundings and from nature. So I guess I'm not asking a question, I'm just making a statement.
Okay, well, I apologise if I seem to be dismissive of certainly those dimensions of his work. Yes, no, I agree that it is to do with certainly the attachment that people have to things. I realise that that's a crucial part of what he was saying, so I hope I didn't give too wrong an impression.
Thanks, Nick, for that. Lynn McBain, second question, last question, thank you.
Thank you for that, that's very interesting. We live that every day. You mentioned futile ambitions and perhaps it's best to give up on things. That can't be for us because that's our lifestyle, that's our home, so I was just wondering, isn't challenging that part of human nature? Isn't it part of human nature to defend, to make better, to create something better for not only yourself living through our age, but also for our future generations?
Yes, it certainly is, and again, I hope I didn't give the impression that I thought people should just lie down and accept whatever comes their way, because that certainly wasn't what I was trying to say. I think what I was trying to say is that sometimes where we focus is not where our energies can make the biggest change to those very things that we do care passionately about, because it is so hard to work out some of these connections and which are the pressure points. So, for instance, I would say that in Queensland, which I'm most familiar with, our local governments for years were throwing up their hands in horror at how hard it was for them to examine increasingly enormous environmental impact statements when a mining development was going to happen, and get a response in the rather narrow window of the public consultation period to say the things they thought had been...
I would suggest that's still the same case everywhere.
But what has happened is they've realised getting in when the terms of reference are being written for the company to do its environmental impact statement gives much more of a pressure point and can make the company address the things they care about. So I think they're getting more strategic about, yes, that very important component of citizen action and of involving the community.
I quite agree with you.
Lynn, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut it off there. You might like to take it up later on with Joanne. Joanne, thank you very much for your presentation. You've added another layer of complexity which we probably didn't need, but it's really good to have it anyway. Thank you very much.
All be understood in their entirety before we can understand what a reading on a monitor means. If we don't know what the units are about and whether the 2.5 is included in the 10 or not, if we don't know what the time period it applies for, if we try to compare things that are collected on one time period with ones collected on a different time period, this sort of complexity is one of the other challenges. There's also this loss of control. We humans are used, of course, to many of the problems that we need to deal with being beyond our control, notably natural disasters. We're also used to man-made problems like wars and slavery and issues like that. What some of these theorists are arguing is that now what we've got is a situation where it's our own science and technology, the things that are trying to bring about progress for human beings, that are also causing the problems. That these are side effects of the progress, and that these technological developments are creating a kind of almost another category of risk for us that maybe that does need to be handled in different ways. But one of the outstanding characteristics of all of this is that whereas in the past we may have had a sense of certainty, and there may have been a feeling that we could get to the end, to the conclusion, find the truth, and have things solved, actually many people are saying that is a futile ambition these days. It will all, the jury will always be out. The case will always have to remain open. There'll always be room for new knowledge, new understandings, and we will always be being made aware not only of learning new things every day, but of how much more there is for us to know and understand. So that degree of uncertainty is one of the most unsettling things about these kinds of problems. So having sort of said maybe what sounds a bit doom and gloom, but how are different groups approaching these things, and particularly when they're dealing with air quality issues? And so I'm just going to give you a few examples here of both specific initiatives and some very targeted mechanisms that are being used, just to be a bit of a basis to outline what might be the common elements of them. So the first is a project called Clean and Healthy Air for Gladstone. My colleague from Queensland is well aware of this one. So Gladstone, most of you would probably know, is a bit like Newcastle. Really, it's a very industrial city on the central coast of Queensland, which has been very much in the news of late because of dead fish in the harbour. But prior to that, there was an equally fraught concern about air quality in this town, which has a number of major industries of various kinds, and it is a major coal terminal as well. So the Clean and Healthy Air for Gladstone project was a multi-sector approach. It involved the department, at that stage the Department of Environment and Resource Management, Queensland Health, a community reference group, through mainly it was more than one council, they've now been amalgamated, so the local council, and an industry reference group through an umbrella body of theirs called the Gladstone Industry Leadership Group, and some independent experts. So this group worked together. It was actually a Queensland Government initiative, and one of the key things they did was commission 3 studies: an airshed study, a population health study, and some industry benchmarking around their emissions and so on. And the outcome has been an integrated air monitoring network in the city, not unlike your Hunter Valley one, with live air quality data publicly available on the web, and some attempts at getting consistency in how that is reported and comparability in those sorts of results. So there's one example that shows some of the issues or characteristics I'll draw out later. Also talking about another step that's been taken in Queensland to try and come up with some solutions which people would only ever claim are partial solutions. These all have some part to play. Some people talk about that for wicked problems you can only ever get clumsy solutions. It's never going to be nice and elegant and neat, but it's definitely worth having some of these partial responses. So this one has to do with managing emissions in transit. So on the railways, QR National has been doing some experimenting with veneering. And in fact, as of the end of this year, all central Queensland mines will have veneering spray stations in place. So this is a process whereby a biodegradable polymer is sprayed onto the top of the loaded coal. There are other factors that go into it, or other measures that go into it, like what they call profiling. The exact shape and dimensions of the load is also calculated. Basically, in the trials of this and of different chemicals and so on, the requirements were that there would be 0 dust lift-off from 10 different coal types to characterise what was coming out of Queensland, with no harmful effects for humans or the environment. And they have now come up with what they think is a very effective solution that does reduce coal dust emissions by up to 90%. There still are some that are as much to do with the residual on the outsides of carriages and on lines and things like that, this process using monitoring stations has been shown to be quite effective. So I just wonder whether it's one that could apply down here, perhaps. The second example is another Queensland example, and that's the Mooraba Cumulative Impacts Group. So in this case, a local council actually, which is not unlike, say, Singleton or Muswellbrook, in that here's a rural town that is surrounded by mines at different stages of development and being operated by different companies, both underground and open cut. And so what was perceived by the residents of the town to be an issue with dust was just being used as a football, as people said, well, we're underground miners, so it's not us. And other people said, well, we're downwind, so it's not us. And everybody was sort of trying to pass the buck and most interested in, well, how much are we going to have to be responsible for, instead of starting to say, the problem is for the people in the town. Don't let's spend our whole life working out who's responsible for what proportion of it. Let's see if we can't concertedly address improving the situation in the town. And that we can only do by working together and with the local council and community representatives. And so they have, over a period of a few years, established a group that is systematically addressing this. It has managed to get some monitors, so where all of the mines were conditioned to have monitors around their perimeter, they were all conditioned to deliver reports on that. But now there are 2 monitors in the town that are about what's happening to the people there. And that is something that is funded by the council, by industry and state government. And one of the issues that those people needed to come to terms with was, well, there are so many decisions, like here in the presentations this morning, so many decisions once it comes to this monitoring. What sorts of things do we want to monitor? What are we going to use it for? Are we going to use it to manage? Are we going to use it to assign responsibility? Are we going to use it to predict and give warning of problems? What are going to be the acceptable levels that we all understand are all right within a 24-hour period, a year, etc., etc.? How will we connect sources and consequences, and how important is that? Which should we be putting our weight on? All of these issues to decide, because all of the mines were using different kinds of monitors that reported things that couldn't really speak to each other. That data wasn't something you could compare and make a picture of what's happening in the region from it. And of course also raised this morning the issue of, is this cost effective for the value we're getting out of it in addressing the problem we're concerned about? And then final example, the Upper Hunter Air Quality Monitoring Network, which we've heard already about this morning, and which you're probably all more familiar with than I am. But again, an example of something that is funded by government and by industry, and that's an agreed apportionment of the contributions that various industries should make and various companies should make. It is a monitoring network, and there's some standardisation built into that so that we can compare and even aggregate the data from it. That central database has reporting functions, it has warning functions, and it feeds back to the operators as well as being publicly available. And again, looking at your region, the Hunter New England Health Study has been an example of one of the studies done here that again is adding to the amount of information and knowledge that you have. As I understand it, has shown that there's a higher incidence of diseases, including respiratory diseases in the region, but the usual thing, knowledge about that exposure to those pollutants is incomplete, the causal link is not established, and it's unclear what the role of various risk factors might be. In the Gladstone one, we certainly had the example when the Clean and Healthy Air for Gladstone did their population health study, that they found that the incidence, the higher incidence of respiratory diseases was associated with households where somebody smoked, and it was an anti-smoking campaign that would have had the best impact on the health of people there. So these things, these studies are very helpful in both showing us what we still don't know and sometimes showing us that there's something coming from left field that we can work on quickly. And so, to wind up fairly quickly, the challenge is to weigh the rewards against the risk. Here you've had studies done in 2006 and 2009 that have shown that people in general feel the rewards do outweigh the risks, or at least they did up until 2009, and I don't know whether this has been repeated. It would have been due for a rerun last year. I'll leave the black swan explanation as a cryptic thing. If people know the story of how people, until Australia was discovered, thought that all swans were white and were blindsided by the fact that we could have something that was black instead, you might be able to extrapolate what the analogy with the black swan is there. But I just want to quickly then sum up a few characteristics of successful management strategies. First is it's important to communicate openly and transparently with each other and with the whole community, and maintain an ongoing dialogue as we're collecting data and sharing it. Second is the importance of collaboration and community involvement. These initiatives where people try to work in isolation are unlikely to be effective because of those multiple stakeholders that are involved and their different interests and needs. We need to consider cumulative effects so that the effects across time, across space, beyond the boundary, beyond normal boundaries, whether it be catchments, whether it be the perimeter of an operation, whether it be a region for administrative purposes, etc., are all considered, and particularly the interactions and feedbacks get taken into account. And we need to shift from a mindset of culprits and trying to work out who to blame for things to a mindset of custodianship, which is future focused, which is saying, how do we care for this? And it involves very astute planning and forward looking that's based on shared values and understandings. So with those various pieces of the puzzle, we might end up being able to cope via clumsy solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Craig, we have time for a couple of questions. Two quick questions. Thank you. Nick. Nick Higginbotham.
Yeah, Nick Higginbotham. Thank you for the presentation. You started out with the premise that all communities have a quest for diversification. I'm not sure I agree with that. And, or that when you think about diversification, and then of course you said, of course since that's true, then we all just have to figure out the best way to manage it. I think maybe and there's some communities that are probably fairly happy with the way things are. Maybe it's diverse enough that they're getting what they feel is enough reward from their environment. But if there is diversification, it should be in ecologically sustainable terms, which is a concept that this government adopted 20 years ago, but I really don't see operating. So I'm just cautioning you about that, I guess, from my point of view. The other thing is he used Glenn Albright's work, which I'm fairly familiar with, and mentioned that the notion of solastalgia comes out of a sense of people unhappy with change. It's way much more than that. It came out of his sense about ecosystem distress, and it came out of his sense about people being connected to nature, and that you gain sustenance from your connectedness with your surroundings. And these are the things that fulfill us as human beings and respect other species and so forth. And so when you see those moments where that environment is transformed against your will in a negative way forever, that's the sense of solastalgia. It's not just change. It's change that separates you from your surroundings and from nature. So I guess I'm not asking a question, I'm just making a statement.
Okay, well, I apologise if I seem to be dismissive of certainly those dimensions of his work. Yes, no, I agree that it is to do with certainly the attachment that people have to things. I realise that that's a crucial part of what he was saying, so I hope I didn't give too wrong an impression.
Thanks, Nick, for that. Lynn McBain, second question, last question, thank you.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. We live that every day. You mentioned futile ambitions and perhaps it's best to give up on things. That can't be for us because that's our lifestyle. That's our home. So I was just wondering, isn't challenging that part of human nature? Isn't it part of human nature to defend, to make better, to create something better for not only yourself living through our age, but also for our future generations?
Yes, it certainly is, and again, I hope I didn't give the impression that I thought people should just lie down and accept whatever comes their way, because that certainly wasn't what I was trying to say. I think what I was trying to say is that sometimes where we focus is not where our energies can make the biggest change to those very things that we do care passionately about, because it is so hard to work out some of these connections and which are the pressure points. So, for instance, I would say that in Queensland, which I'm most familiar with, our local governments for years were throwing up their hands in horror at how hard it was for them to examine increasingly enormous environmental impact statements when a mining development was going to happen, and get a response in this rather narrow window of the public consultation period to say the things they thought had been...
I would suggest that's still the same case everywhere.
But what has happened is they realised getting in when the terms of reference are being written for the company to do its environmental impact statement gives much more of a pressure point and can make the company address the things they care about. So I think they're getting more strategic about, yes, that very important component of citizen action and of involving the community.
I quite agree with you.
Lynn, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut it off there. You might like to take it up later on with Joanne. Joanne, thank you very much for your presentation. You've added another layer of complexity which we probably didn't need, but